Hun 100, Harry C., and thought Harry and Ron were being a little too earnest. Yes, Ron's face went red at the mention of still having homework to copy. He looked as if he'd resigned himself to his fate. Harry nervously lowered his head. Sheehan nodded and moved on. Professor Snape was waiting for him in the dungeons. Although Harry and Ron had surprised him, he wasn't going to linger. "He's nothing like what we expected," Ron muttered. After a beat of stunned realization, joy spread all over Ron's face. "Mr. Green is, at least not Percy, and not Hermione. I still have green notes to copy, Merlin. That's brilliant." Just as Sheehan was about to leave, Harry remembered what Wood had hinted and meant to ask, subtly, whether Sheehan had joined the Quidditch team. He couldn't bring himself to do it. After everything, suddenly prying into Ravenclaw's Quidditch tactics felt wrong. But he had to say something, so when he saw Neville and Justin off in the distance, he blurted, "Can you teach us some spells? Like Neville." It was an impulsive, half-meaningless plea, born more from desperation than intent. Wood wanted them to spend every spare second on Quidditch training, and Harry didn't know how to finish all that homework. To his surprise, after a moment's thought, Sheehan actually nodded. On the way back to the Great Hall, Harry and Ron were quiet for a while. They stared at the few notebooks Sheehan had shown them as if they were rare treasure. "Harry, I was wrong. Terribly wrong. Sheehan is practically a carbon copy of Professor Sprout. Why didn't we find him sooner?" Ron said ruefully. "From now on, I'm not allowed to say a bad word about him." Harry watched Ron, completely won over, and nodded. At the end of the corridor, Sheehan walked on, thinking. He had been surprised by Harry more than once, and though unexpected, he'd been happy to help. Seeing the thin boy with the broken glasses and the lightning scar on his forehead, Sheehan felt something settle in his mind. Harry Potter, the boy who lived, had never chosen to be a savior. He had lost his parents to Voldemort's curse as an infant and grown up in the corner of the Dursleys' house where even a decent birthday present was a luxury. His scar, the mark the wizarding world regarded as an emblem of honor, was, to Sheehan, the brand of an attempt on a child's life. Harry's fate had never wholly belonged to him. Trelawney's prophecy might have bound him to Voldemort in some way, but what made Harry a hero were his repeated choices. In his first year, he confronted Voldemort to protect the Philosopher's Stone. In the Chamber of Secrets, he risked his life to save Ginny. During the Triwizard Tournament, he insisted on bringing Cedric's body back to Hogwarts. The worth of a person is not measured by the glory they attract, but by whether they deserve fair treatment. Harry Potter was not only an orphan of tragedy, more importantly, he inherently deserved a little kindness. Once Sheehan understood that, it was hard for him to accept Harry's sacrifices as simple inevitabilities. Where he could help, Sheehan was glad to do so. It was a small thing compared to Harry's long, hard years at Hogwarts, but Sheehan didn't mind. The dungeons were cold and dim. Professor Snape had been waiting a long time, reclining in the shadows so Sheehan couldn't see his face clearly. Yet Snape's expressions, sarcastic, cutting, and when roused, explosive, were all too familiar. Processing ingredients, lighting the cauldron, controlling the heat, Sheehan's handling of the swelling solution at entry level had made his movements fluid and precise. After this batch, he would begin brewing swelling solution proper. Of the 3 potions he had learned, only swelling solution had not yet reached entry level. Once it did, a new potion title would unlock. Sheehan felt a little thrill. Apprentice-level titles usually gave a modest boost to affinity in a branch of magic. Reaching entry level raised perception significantly. Perception was the ability to observe and measure. For potions, it helped him judge the potion's state and quality more accurately and adjust technique accordingly. White mist rose again around the cauldron, and Snape's gloomy eyes held a complicated look. He was certain the potion's quality had changed, but he couldn't place Mr. Green's technique. He scorned the notion of understanding it, but that didn't mean he would tolerate this young wizard wandering through the field of potions as if it were an idiotic sport like Quidditch. Snape fixed Sheehan with a stare. Just don't mess up the dungeons. You have brewed a pot of swelling solution at entry level. Proficiency +3. Brewing the swelling solution had become second nature. Even without using the improvement ritual or the guidance method, Xian had produced an entry-level potion, already very close to proficient. Progress was slow, but steady and strong. After he extinguished the cauldron and stored the potion in a glass cabinet, inside a compartment Snape insisted was the only place fit for Xian's trash, Xian took out his notebook. The stirring amplitude is too large. When adding the second ingredient, increase the heat, he wrote. Snape's usual sarcasm floated through the room. Xian Green, humph, with such talent, how dare you tamper with potion rituals? Xian ignored the latter half and copied the first observation into his notes. His emerald eyes brightened. It seemed he had found the missing piece to reach proficient. The main difference between proficient and entry was that proficient potions met market standards, another steady source of income, he thought. He set the notebook down on the wooden table in the dungeons and turned to fetch ingredients from the glass shelves. Dried nettle, pufferfish eyes, bat spleen, all on the left side of the second shelf. Time slipped by like wind in the dungeon. After tidying the table, Xian silently and deliberately stepped back into the shadows. Chapter 101. Trust inside Hogwarts. The common rooms and the Great Hall glowed with roaring fires, but the drafty corridors were bone-chilling, and the classroom windows rattled in the biting wind. The worst place of all was the potions classroom. Xian's breath made a pale mist in front of him. The cauldrons had cooled, and he shivered. His sweater was thin. At that moment, the only difference he felt between himself and Headmaster Dumbledore was that Dumbledore needed wool socks, and he needed a proper sweater. His thoughts drifted. Mrs. Weasley's habit of knitting Christmas sweaters, Dumbledore saying he once saw wool socks before the Mirror of Erised, and he even imagined, with an odd little smile, that those socks might have belonged to Gellert Grindelwald. Professor Snape, however, was not smiling. He stared down at Xian's notes with a hard, unreadable expression, a look that slid from disdain to surprise, and then to something flat and emotionless. "You should know," he said, his voice low and cold. "This is extremely precious." Xian nodded. There was a sharpness in him, too, a private irritation at Snape's bluster, and the words in the margins of the notes flashed in his mind. Labacious Borrage's greatest achievement was not in discovering potion rituals or the will guidance method, but in carrying the trajectory of truth onward, placing it fully in the hands of his successor. Snape's voice had a catch in it when he read on. He glanced down at the next line, and his face changed again. "Infinite distance, endless truth. You should know they are being born in your hands." Anger drained out of Snape like color from a picture, replaced by a whisper barely kept from cracking. "If you had known, Xian Green, you would not have let this be revealed." He looked at Xian as if trying to see inside him. Xian met the gaze without flinching. "Professor," he said softly, "in fact, only you know." Snape's mocking smirk froze. He stared at the boy who had stood beside him in the gloom. For a long moment, he seemed lost for words. When he finally spoke, his face was grim. "Do you think everyone is trustworthy?" The words were ground out between his teeth, as if he were rebuking Xian and himself at once, punishing the foolishness that once led him to trust Lord Voldemort. "Listen to me," Snape hissed. "Xian Green, you are not to show those notes to anyone. If you do—" He held the papers like a threat. The student in front of him was maddening, stubborn, stubbornly pure. As Xian left the dungeon classroom with light steps, Snape's eyes stayed fixed on him. The feelings roiling under his cold surface were ones he hated and feared, resentment sealed so long it had rusted, old wounds wanting to intimidate new hope. It felt absurd, upsetting, and somehow intimate. This idiot trusted him. On the corridor walls, the portraits were mostly asleep, some snoring, others slumped with hats askew and the occasional drool threatening to smear their frames. Sir Cadogan, who had been waiting and now dozed off, slumped and snored. Two sleeping ladies nearby wore similar expressions, and Xian, amused in spite of the cold, wondered whether they got on because they shared the same tastes. A few torches still burned in iron sconces, throwing long, flickering shadows that made the ancient carvings and tapestries seem to move. Xian was used to wandering the castle at night. Only the cold bothered him. Sometimes, Madame Norris would shadow him for a stretch, and then Justin's dried fish, absurd as it sounded, was useful. A little treat, a quick rub behind the ears, and the cat's favor was his. Tonight, though, Madame Norris was nowhere to be seen. Around a corner, a faint rustle sounded. 3 small figures in wizarding robes slipped out from the wide base of an armor stand. The boy at the front had a messy mop of blonde hair and freckles that stood out in the torchlight. He clutched his wand and peered nervously down the corridor. "See clear?" he whispered, voice trembling. He didn't look back for an answer. The second boy nodded and gestured for the others to follow. "Filch is definitely napping in his office," the blonde hissed, excitement breaking through his nerves. "He usually takes a break about now, and I saw Madame Norris head that way." Most of the mischief makers brave enough to try anything in Filch's office came from Gryffindor. Chien was about to pass when one word made him pause: dung bombs. Zonkos had been selling them since the 1880s, Alberic Grunning's rotten-smelling contraption, and they were among the nastiest prank items. Even touching one made your hands filthy. He pictured Mr. Filch cursing as he cleaned them up and quickened his pace. He was too late. A shriek split the corridor as Madame Norris streaked past, startled. The 3 boys were already preparing a spell, aguamenti, aimed to spray cold water at the cat. The leading boy mispronounced it in his excitement. "Aguamenti," he blurted. Madame Norris bolted. Chien didn't hesitate. He scooped the cat up and brought her to his shoulder. "Finite incantatum," he murmured, and the water fizzle stopped midair. Madame Norris hissed and settled on his shoulder, claws kneading at the wool. "Run," the blonde blurted, trying to dart for the trophy room stairs. "Bullying someone who can't do magic isn't fun, sir." Chien stepped to block the doorway. The 3 boys froze, then turned, their faces hardening. They raised their wands, and their bravado shifted into something sharper. The air around them crackled with teenage defiance. Chapter 103. Filch she, and didn't know the 2 of them. He guessed they were second-year wizards. That didn't stop him from quietly undoing the minor spells they had cast, one by one. With Madame Norris hissing and a transfigured wild boar planted at his feet, the young wizards could neither advance nor retreat. Chien watched them with mounting panic, and when he realized how thoroughly he'd cowed them, he slipped away from the door without a sound. The second years were overjoyed. One of them stammered a promise that he'd never come back. Chien only nodded and stepped inside Filch's office. The scene was shocking. The stench alone filled the room and drifted a good 5 meters beyond. Mud smeared the walls, and a cabinet lay overturned. Madame Norris stopped hissing, rubbed against Chien's face, then led him to a wall. With a faint rumble, a concealed fireplace revealed itself, apparently hidden to keep young wizards from damaging this indispensable feature. Whatever the reason, the sight warmed Chien more than the chill in his bones. He stroked Madame Norris's fur again. "You have gained the affection of the magical creature catling, Norris, to an expert level, proficiency 50. Magical creature catling. Not affectionate. Apprentice level, magical creature affection, can unlock apprentice level title in the magical creatures field." Before Chien could do anything with that prompt, a figure appeared in the doorway, a thick plaid scarf wrapped around his head. Mr. Filch stormed in like a man possessed. "Damn dirty things," he barked, eyes bulging, the flesh on his double chin trembling. "Filthy everywhere. Everything's a mess. I'll report this to the headmaster." For a moment, Chien felt at a loss for words. Then Filch froze when he recognized him. Madame Norris leapt onto Filch's shoulder, and the caretaker's frantic expression softened into a stammered, "Chien Green?" "It's me, Mr. Filch," Chien said. "Ah, okay. Thank you, Green," Filch managed. He still sounded angry, but there was relief behind it. "Go on then, Green. Hurry up and go." He shepherded Chien out, still muttering, clutching Madame Norris. When the door closed behind him, Chien caught a last glimpse of Filch's twisted, resentful face. In that look, Chien found an uneasy sympathy. Filch's job was to keep Hogwarts clean, an impossible task when most of the population could conjure, prank, and leave chaos in their wake. Peeves's antics, the Weasley twins' fireworks, dung bombs tossed in corridors. Without magic, maintaining order in a castle full of wizards must grind a person's spirit down. Filch's harshness now seemed in part a product of that relentless, thankless work. But where else would the school hire a squib? Chien thought as he put his wand away and left the office. Filch stayed, rooted in the doorway, staring at the suddenly tidy room. Chien Green, he called again. Chien turned. Filch stood with the night's bite in the air, a scarf still tangled on his head. The cold seemed to cut across his throat. All Filch could do was speak plainly. It's raining outside, damp and windy. Dress warmly, Green. His lips trembled as he said it. Chien managed a small smile. There will be good weather. For a squib who longed for magic, life didn't promise a heroic finale, not one of concerts or revelations, probably only a slow, ordinary end. So Chien kept his face blank, tried to be natural, and held his laugh in small, controlled doses. He didn't want to stir up anyone else's pain. He had already broken curfew, but Filch made no move to report him. Madame Norris purred with a dried fish clamped in her jaws. Filch shuffled back into his office, muttering about the fireplace. Despite his usual contempt for anyone with magic and the way he'd been looked down on by wizards his whole life, there was a tiny flicker of something like expectation in him today. "Oh, I heard you learned another spell, Green?" Filch asked when he came back. "Finite incantatum, sir. It ends other people's spells," Chien replied. "Ah, good, very good," Filch muttered approvingly. He hesitated, then pulled a crumpled scarf from somewhere around his person. "I mean, the scarf, if." Chien, shivering in the cold night air, took it gratefully. "Thank you, Mr. Filch." "You're welcome," Filch said awkwardly. The weather grew worse, and Chien felt the cold bite through his thin, well-worn uniform. Hogwarts' uniform came with a wool sweater, but one thin layer clearly wasn't enough. If an enchanted mirror could have shown him his heart's wish, it would have dressed him in a thick, oversized jumper. So instead, he lingered near fireplaces more often than anyone seemed to find ordinary. Sometimes, Hermione wondered why he spent so much time in front of them. Later, in the faculty lounge, Chien darted past a shabby wardrobe piled with teachers' robes and 2 talking stone beasts. Professor Flitwick, peering over the chaos, chuckled. "It seems your finite incantatum is coming along well, Mr. Green." Flitwick flicked his wand. A thick stream of water gushed from the tip as if on cue. "Finite incantatum." Chien knocked his own wand out, and the stream vanished. Since the day he had quickly countered Siamis's aguamenti in class, Flitwick had made these semi-duels a part of his assessments. The sudden attacks had sharpened Chien's reflexes and practical spell work. He was learning to recognize gestures and counter them with the right charm. "Very good, Mr. Green," Flitwick squeaked. "However, the disillusionment charm is very difficult. Are you sure you want to learn it? There's another update later." Chapter 104, The Cursed Combination. There was no doubt that the disillusionment charm was taught in the higher years. Even Professor Flitwick was a little surprised that Chien wanted to learn it now. At first, he suspected the boy of sneaking out at night, but he dismissed the idea. Mr. Green's reputation for following the rules was well known. That left only one other explanation. "Oh, my boy," Professor Flitwick said, his eyes creasing with a smile. "I had the same idea when I was your age, learning different spell combinations to become a dueling master." Chien's thoughts were exposed. He nodded, and the professor's smile widened. "Dueling. How I miss it. If you're going to learn the disillusionment charm, why not learn the quieting charm at the same time?" The quieting charm appears in standard spells, primary. Its effect is to dampen sound. Chien immediately thought of pairing it with the disillusionment charm. One removes sight, the other removes sound. "But first, show me what spells you already know," Professor Flitwick said, clearly curious. "Cast them, Mr. Green." Chien nodded and flicked his wand. At the clear incantation, Flitwick watched as a robe in the wardrobe transformed into a wild boar. "Advanced Intermediate Transfiguration. Astonishing," the professor exclaimed, admiration in his eyes. "I'm glad you're using your talent well." There was more to the professor's words than praise. "Oh, disillusionment, finite incantatum," he mused, then hopped down from his chair excitedly. "A wise choice. But try it like this." Chien watched as Flitwick waved his wand. A robe floated up, became a shield above the wardrobe. Then the professor flicked again, and it turned into a spear. "What did you see, Mr. Green?" "A combination of levitation and transfiguration, Professor," Chien answered. He felt as if he'd discovered a new continent. He recalled how Dumbledore, during his duel with Voldemort at the Ministry, had summoned a glass shield to block a killing curse and then turned it into a sand attack, an advanced combination. Still, he was puzzled. Wizards can't cast 2 spells at once, can they? Flitwick's voice was high and cheerful, but full of meaning. Powerful wizards can cast 2 spells simultaneously, as far as I know. Casting a spell requires 3 things: the correct wand movement, the proper pronunciation, and concentrated intent. To cast 2 spells at once, you must divide your attention and guide 2 currents of magic simultaneously, an enormous challenge for the mind. As he spoke, Flitwick transformed the spear into a sword, and the sword began to circle CN. The boy realized the professor had been casting 2 spells all along. His emerald eyes brightened with hunger for knowledge, which the professor read easily. He changed the sword back into a robe and placed it in Xian's hand. "You must be wondering how to cast 2 spells at once, especially as a young wizard," Flitwick said. "The simplest method is nonverbal casting." He had Xian cast a nonverbal levitation charm on the teapot on the table, then continued, "If you can cast 1 spell nonverbally, you can theoretically speak another incantation while maintaining the first. Another more practical technique is to maintain a continuous magical effect, then cast an instantaneous spell. Try casting Lumos, Mr. Green." Xian kept the teapot afloat. He noticed that once he'd set the levitation, it required much less attention to maintain, and because he was practiced, it didn't demand his full focus. "Lumos," he said. His wand tip glowed, but almost immediately there was the sound of glass shattering. "Amazing talent," Flitwick clapped. "The key is to guide the 2 magical forces differently, Mr. Green." Xian frowned. He had felt 2 distinct currents of magic, especially the Lumos, intertwining with the levitation in an instant, which had caused the mishap. "Proficiency, Mr. Green. You need to be proficient." Flitwick blinked, then repaired the teapot with a casual flourish. Xian realized his Lumos skill wasn't yet high enough. He nodded inwardly. If he could reach the required proficiency, he could use levitation to snatch an opponent's wand and then follow with a knockback jinx. Or levitate a stone to distract and immediately cast Stupefy, or, as the professor had done, transfigure an object and then use levitation to make it a weapon. Compared to a wizard who could only cast 1 spell at a time, his combat options would multiply. He didn't think he could cast 2 incantation-based spells simultaneously, nor 2 continuous spells. Even Professor Flitwick had only made the sword spin after the transfiguration was complete. Hermione had once said in 5th year that she couldn't disillusion Harry while maintaining Stupefy on the house elf Winky, which showed that the more difficult the spells, the less likely you can cast them together. But combining levitation with almost any other spell would greatly increase his effectiveness in a fight. And who knew? If he became proficient in 2 advanced spells, the possibilities would expand even further. Knowledge, he thought, was never wasted. Over the next period, Professor Flitwick carefully taught Xian the disillusionment charm. It was a spell taught in 5th year, meant to make a person blend into their surroundings like a chameleon. "Stand still," the professor said with a smile. Xian stood. Flitwick walked up and tapped the top of his head with his wand. A strange, cold sensation flowed from the point of contact and spread over Xian's body. It felt like an invisible film sliding over his skin, wet and smooth, making him gradually transparent. He could tell this was the full effect of the disillusionment charm. Not only had his color merged with the background, his outline and shadow vanished as well, as if he were wearing an invisibility cloak. Chapter 105, 104, In the Storm. In the 2nd week of October, a cold wind whistled around Hogwarts, turning loose stones on the paths and making them tumble. A flash of lightning split the sky, sending fallen leaves spinning, followed by a roll of thunder. Neville complained that his desk had been shaking. It was clearly not a good time to be outside the castle, and yet 3 small figures, bundled in thick robes and raincoats, slipped out behind it. "All right, Neville, you can hide behind me for now, but not forever," Justin said, falling into step to Cien's left as he handed over a small bag from his own pack. It looked smooth and soft, like it had been made from some creature's hide. Neville had shuffled from Cien's right to a position behind Justin. Each time lightning cracked, Neville's head ducked. In class, Hermione had scolded him impatiently. "Neville, if you're that frightened of thunder, just stay in the classroom." Neville had only managed a shaky, "Oh, okay." and Hermione had rolled her eyes as if she'd rather shove earmuffs in his ears than argue. Now, standing outside the castle with the storm building, Neville wore earmuffs Hermione had given him and still trembled slightly. The little bag from Justin distracted him enough to stare. Justin set it into CN's hand. "A metamorphosis lizard skin bag," he said with a mild smile. "Great for seeds, small shovels, and the like." Shien's slender hand, slipping out of the heavy rain cloak Professor Sprout had provided, slipped a parchment into the pouch. It was about to pour. He didn't want his notes to get wet. Parchment, unlike leather, wasn't tanned and was sensitive to humidity, something he'd fretted over while working in the greenhouse. Justin's small gift solved the problem. He'd read about these pouches in miscellaneous volumes. A metamorphosis lizard skin bag is a tiny sack that only its owner can retrieve items from. It looks small, but it holds a surprising amount. Justin watched Shien slide the parchment inside and sighed, a little helplessly. "I knew it would end up like this." "Oh, Neville, this is for you." He held out another bag. Neville's throat shook. "What about you?" he stammered. Justin produced a bag that had clearly been charmed with an undetectable extension charm. Neville's eyes widened in silent envy. Then, "Thank you," he managed. Since October began, Shien had been spending 3 days a week in the greenhouse, 3 hours at a stretch, and lately he'd been staying even longer. To brace for autumn squalls and downpours, Hogwarts's greenhouse had been heavily prepared. The structure had been reinforced with permanent spells, much like the castle's own protections, to withstand severe weather. Inside, there were constant temperature charms, humidity control enchantments, and even soundproofing that created a steady microclimate. That didn't mean the greenhouse was invulnerable. Leaks, blocked drains, and the need to move certain sun-loving plants outside of the glass dome still kept the staff busy. Fortunately, CN, Neville, Justin, and Bruce were helping on a rota. Outside the dome, dark, heavy clouds pressed down. The three were wrapped in thick rainproofs and black and yellow scarves. A trio of older students, taller by a head, hurried over at the sight of them. "Hey, Shien, perfect timing. We'll leave this with you," Bruce said, slipping a red envelope into Shien's hand. "It arrived this afternoon. Please, help." Shien took the letter with a small, helpless sigh. No sooner had Bruce opened it than the envelope belted out, making Shien's black hair fly up from the blast of sound. Where did you throw your brother Charles's wand?" the letter roared. Shien clamped his hands to his ears. Behind him, Bruce hummed and muttered, half to himself, "Must be about that wand. That thing's practically an antique to worship, and they're still using it. Hey, Mrs. Lees, you can't refuse the money I sent now." When the shouting finally died down, Bruce leaned in and pressed a fizzing Whizbee into Shien's palm. "I'll repay you properly, little green. Soon. Blame the owl if it went to the wrong person. What else can I do?" He began to leave, but Leon grabbed his collar and hauled him back. "Sorry, little green," Leon said like a man at the end of his rope. "I'll not let him off." "Leon, little green already agreed. How could you?" "Shut up, you scoundrel." Bruce and his companions bickered as they strode across the wet lawn, getting smaller in the rain. Professor Sprout was waiting for them at the greenhouse door with relief written on her face. "Thank you so much, young people. The plants will need every hand we can spare." "We came voluntarily, Professor." "We're glad to help," Justin replied, lifting 2 potted specimens toward the glass wall. Neville took a shovel and began poking at a drainage hole clogged with a mat of black root grass. Shien said little, but he was the most efficient. His silent levitation charm moved clumps and pots in an instant. The 3 of them worked under Professor Sprout's brisk, plump supervision as thunder rolled overhead. Wind gusted, rain hammered, the ground turned slick and treacherous, visibility fell, and all manner of curious plants hissed and dripped. Still, they bent to their tasks. Over the weeks, CN had not only learned to identify and handle a dozen greenhouse species, he had also been given many seeds by Professor Sprout, small tokens and new responsibilities for weathering the season together. Sif. Stove. Chapter The Fireplace. The advantage of a perpetually burning fireplace was simple. The 3 wet students could always dry off. Damp, cold air lingered at the back of the classroom, and the closer you got to the hearth, the stronger the smell became. a warm mix of dried wool and sharp, resinous pine smoke. 3 small figures sat there with steaming cups of tea. Justin produced a camera. A soft click sounded, and Hermione's voice snapped. "Cien, not again! Give it here!" Hermione appeared most days by the fireplace. She pouted, handed over a towel, and opened her mouth to scold, then bit back the words. "And you, so filthy!" Seeing the muddy footprints Justin had tracked across the floor, she waved her wand, and the boards were clean in an instant. She tossed a fresh towel at Justin. Neville, who'd been watching Cien practice Transfiguration, now cowered to the side, words frozen on his tongue. 2 towels were thrust into his arms. He was wetter than the others. The 4 of them clustered around the fire. Its light and warmth danced across their faces. Justin handed some seeds to Hermione, while Neville, clutching a pot of newly sprouted plump bubble pods, grinned like an idiot. Because they'd worked hard in the greenhouse, Professor Sprout had not only awarded them house points, but given them extra seeds. Parts of the classroom were dotted with plants now, making the room feel more and more like a cozy secret base. Cien's gains weren't limited to a few seeds. After Professor Snape's mocking introductions to potion ingredients, Cien paid careful attention while handling materials in the greenhouse. For sunroot, he learned it needed grinding into a powder and watched the grinding closely. For Abyssinian shrivelfig, he learned the peeling process and noted when and how to remove its shell. Herbology and potions were intertwined, as closely linked as ancient runes and alchemy. Over several weeks, Cien spent a great deal of time studying and finally memorized an easy introduction to ancient runes and the magical phonetic table. The complexity of that project was no less than thoroughly mastering 2 of Professor McGonagall's prized books. Why did Cien bother? Because he had tackled both tasks at once. But what he looked forward to most was tonight's potion brewing. He was only 10 proficiency points away from unlocking a new potion domain title. After drying his heavy robe, he hung it in the classroom wardrobe. It would have been stifling near the fireplace or a cauldron anyway. Sprout had reinforced the rainproof robe with charms to keep the young wizards healthy. The rain hadn't stopped, and by evening the air had turned sharp and cold. The surrounding mountains were gray with ice and snow, and the lake lay cold and hard as quenched steel. The Great Hall's fireplace filled with Ravenclaws and Gryffindors. Their common rooms were higher and closer to the hall, unlike the Hufflepuff's snug rooms near the kitchens. So during breaks, the hall often teemed with students from those 2 houses. At one of the long tables, Ron was absorbed in wizard chess, head bent in concentration. With one command, his knight smashed an opponent king's head clean off. "Unfair! Rematch! My pieces won't obey me at all." Seamus's face was flushed. His king, apparently in a rare fit of independence, had marched into a square where it could be captured and then suffered the knight's wrath. "You've got a lot to learn," Ron said, packing his chess set with practiced ease. Wizard chess was deceptively complex. Its pieces were alive, each with temperament and pride, so winning required more than knowing the rules. You had to know how to command them. Ron was good at that, which was why he usually won. "Ron, it's odd. You'd normally be scrambling over homework by now. But today—" Dean watched him and frowned. Ron seemed to have been waiting for that. He rummaged in his bag and produced several carefully kept notebooks. "Green notes. Merlin, where did you get these?" The circle of students leaned forward, necks craned. "From Cien, of course." "Oh no, it's a secret," someone blurted. Ron put a hand over his mouth as if to stop himself. "Cien Green? Even the Slytherins say you don't mess with him." Dean's curiosity simmered down at once. "No description can replace Cien," Ron said suddenly, straightening. "If you've got the courage, go see for yourselves." His face reddened and his gaze grew fierce. "I absolutely won't stand for any rumors about Cien." Passing by, Cien quickened his pace. Someone muttered, "He's like a cult leader," and the comment trailed off behind him. Near the dungeon entrance, a group of older students in dark robes poured out, filling the corridor. Cien pressed himself against the wall and listened to their hushed talk. Some cursed Professor Snape outright, most merely nodded in grim agreement. Near the entrance, a figure stood in shadow, face obscured by a hood, clutching a pamphlet and staring coldly down the corridor. The whispers seemed to bounce off him. He only stared at Cien, lingering over the young wizard's slight trembling from the cold and his crumpled scarf. Inside the dungeons, steam rose from cauldrons and chased the chill from Xian's bones. He moved deftly, preparing ingredients for a swelling solution, his technique mirroring Professor Sprout's guidance. Even by Snape's exacting standards, Xian's handling of the few ingredients he knew would qualify as excellent. Snape stood in the gloom, watching. A parchment of instructions lay in one hand atop two earlier dog-eared notes. The earlier whispers seemed to echo in his memory, something he never expected to care about, but the words had stirred him nonetheless. As Xian concentrated on stirring, Snape's voice cut through the warm herbal air. "Humph, let me guess, you're using that outdated stirring method from the Book of Potions. Even a troll wouldn't rely on that now." "Xian, not everything written is correct. If you're not just looking with your eyes, you'll notice the corrections in your notes." In the dungeon, the cold wind whistled and the glass rattled. Sean exhaled a cloud of white breath and picked up the notes, a little surprised. While he had been concentrating on brewing, Professor Snape had impatiently scrawled annotations in the margins. Though the notes were full of barbs, idiot's handling, moronic choice, timing only successful because Merlin protected you, they revealed the deep knowledge of a potions master. Ever since Sean first saw the notes of Great Master Libatius Borage, he had been forced to face an uncomfortable truth. The 3 potions he'd learned weren't in advanced potion making. Borage had handed him the key to a golden treasure chest, but Sean only had a battered wooden box. The two simply didn't match. Snape's annotations, then, were perfectly timed. Relying on the improved ritual and the guiding method, and with Snape's precise corrections, Sean managed to brew an expert-level swelling solution on his first try. You have brewed a pot of swelling solution at the expert level, proficiency 50. A new potion title has been unlocked. Please check. Sean felt a small thrill. A gust of wind made him shiver, and the swelling solution sloshed onto the dry nettles on the table. Thankfully, the deflating draught Snape had had him practice earlier proved invaluable. Sean sprinkled some of it over the spill, and the swollen area immediately subsided. Snape gave a cold snort at how calmly Sean handled the accident. After cleaning up, Sean opened the system panel and read, "Potion Novice, significantly increases potion perception, slightly enhances potion talent." It was a real improvement, he read on eagerly. Wizard Sean, potion talent, green, boosted by Potion Novice title. Original talent was white. Note, average wizards are green. The next title upgrade would affect talent. In the past 2 months, besides herbology, where he'd reached an introductory level, Sean had made progress across multiple disciplines by sheer effort. Compared with his old talent array of 1 purple and 3 white, this felt like a major change. After a quick review of the system, Sean put down the notes and wrote down the ideas that were still fresh in his mind. The guiding method wasn't complete. It currently targeted only the swelling solution and the deflating draught. Even the deflating draught had room for improvement. Compared with Great Master Borage's method, the guiding method added an extra step, the shaping of a scene ritual. Like the improved ritual before it, this step permeated the whole brewing process. Countless subtle preparations and small cues combined to push the potion toward its final transformation. As Sean researched more, he realized the number of details that needed attention would only increase. Improving potion rituals would be a long, patient undertaking. No wonder Borage had perfected only a few in his lifetime. Sean's time was limited. He'd have to choose which draughts merited his focus. Some potions, like the swelling solution, he decided not to perfect the ritual for at all. After reminding Sean to check the notes, Snape's anger began to cool. He watched the faint, cold wind and the slight tremor Sean thought he had concealed, remaining silent as the young man tidied the table and prepared to leave the dungeon. "Stop, Sean Green." The voice came out husky, as if squeezed from the throat. Sean stopped without turning. Snape slapped a parchment down on the table. Then, rather than hitting it hard, he said it gently. Rage trembled behind his words as he barked. "If you ever believe those fanciful ideas again and develop a warped view of noble potions, I swear, Sean Green, I will make you pack up and leave this dungeon." If Snape was willing to let him take his things, Sean felt inexplicably relieved. He folded the parchment and tucked it away. The annotations on the back widened his eyes. As he studied them, Snape's sharp gaze caught the thin, ill-fitting collar of the singlet Sean wore. For a moment, the professor hesitated. In that instant, a memory rose in Snape like a ripple across a lake. A black-haired boy entering Hogwarts decades before, wearing hand-me-down clothes from his mother, the fabric carrying the sour tang of neglect. Someone had mocked him, Snivelus, and those greasy, matted locks were not just neglect, but a silence born of dirty sinks and cracked kitchen tiles. The Hogwarts robe he was given was the first truly clean garment he'd ever owned. When the silver-stitched house crest lay against his chest, an unnameable shiver climbed his spine. "Get out!" His voice cracked with it. Sean didn't notice the memory. He bowed slightly, holding his parchment, and left the dungeon. Snape watched him go, silent, the old echo of his past returning with the sight of that threadbare singlet. In the corridor, Sir Cadogan was at the far end again, alone this time, his battered armor telling of yet another duel. He was trying to pull a sword embedded deeply in the grass. After much struggle, he sat back, pushed up his visor, and wiped his sweating face. "You must have a tenacious heart. The hardest part's yet to come," the knight shouted. Sean set down a painting beside him, a warm scene of a round stool and a crackling bonfire. The knight's eyes brightened. "Clearly another expedition, dear Green. We must vanquish our foe and die bravely in the charge." Sir Cadogan always seemed unable to mount his horse or draw his sword properly, yet he roared with boundless bravado. Sean only nodded. He knew somehow the knight really was capable, not by grand gestures, but by the stubbornness in his chest. "Oh, not necessarily," the knight added as Sean turned to leave. "Little Green, remember this. It's not easy to sing triumphantly through hardship and twists, but silence under the same strain is weighty as well. You'll learn that not all lives roar. Some courage is unspoken." The wind howled around the castle. The corridor and the dungeon had little in common, only two pairs of eyes, both habitually calm, watching their own private storms. Chapter 108, 107, Sweaters. Is it so hard to buy a sweater? When the weather turned cold, Chien had already asked the two older Weasleys to sneak into Hogsmeade and pick up some warm clothes for him, scarves, sweaters, shirts, and boots. They promised to find a chance that very night, but they got off to a rocky start. The moment they tried to slip out of the castle, they were spotted. In the corridor, in a corner just out of sight, the bargaining began. "Sweaters, simple as that," Fred said, blinking. "Since you came to us," George started. Fred gave his brother a meaningful look. "Then you must know our price," Fred pronounced it solemnly. 5 sickles each," George cried, trying to lock eyes with Chien. "Deal." Chien was ready. No, 6 sickles." George, scrambling to keep up, blurted, "Deal!" Chien grabbed one of the twins' hands. The Weasley senior flashed a mock electrified look and shook him off. 7! "Deal!" Chien called. 8, no 9, Merlin. George went limp with melodrama. 3 galleons for scarves, sweaters, shirts, gloves, and boots, everything. Fred protested. "We only charged you 1 sickle, not a single nut more." "I trust you," Chien said. 2 galleons, please, don't haggle anymore." George slumped. "I've never seen a young wizard like you, those lads back home." "They thought they'd make 10 galleons off us," Fred said. "But they only paid 10 nuts," George muttered, glaring. He looked at Chien oddly. "Come on, let's go. Don't make us regret this." Chien nodded. The twins walked off together, and Fred put his arm around George's shoulders. Quietly, he hissed, "How much did we actually make?" 2 sickles, George admitted. They exchanged a triumphant smile and clapped each other's hands. Just then, a sharp meow cut across the corridor. The twins bolted for the secret passage they had entered and were about to disappear when a voice called out, indignant and familiar. "Madame Norris, why is she prowling the corridors at 9 in the evening?" "Fred!" "How would I know?" George shouted back. Fred whipped out a small magical projectile and flung it, some kind of ball filled with big, sticky bubble powder, but Madame Norris was already on their tail. CN, who had waited a while in the corridor for them, watched as the two figures made their awkward escape and then slunk away, disappointed. He wouldn't see them properly again until he found them in the dungeons, serving detention under Professor Snape. For 5 days straight, Snape had kept them from slipping out, despite their promises that they'd steal an hour to get Chien his warm things. According to Fred, they managed to finish early only by tipping off a few Gryffindors as bargaining chips. "Oh, them," George said, half nostalgic. "Even if they're our mates." Fred hummed agreement. It fit Sheehan's picture of the twins perfectly. Daring, loud, and always with an angle. He wondered whether they'd rat him out for money if someone else offered it. In reality, just as they were scrubbing and polishing, Professor Snape's voice cut through the dungeon air like a cold wind. "Tell me, why did you try to sneak out?" Fred, polishing a glass flask, and George, sweeping the floor, both shivered. "We were just testing an old secret passage," Fred said, trying to sound steady. "A passage said to have been abandoned." Snape said nothing for a moment, only offering them that thin, dangerous smile. "If I make you clean the restrooms for 2 weeks." "To buy sweaters, Professor," George wailed. "We need sweaters." Fred put on a look of heartfelt sincerity. Surprisingly, Snape stared at them in silence for a while, then dismissed them. "Get out of my dungeons," he seemed to say without moving his lips. The next morning, in the Great Hall, the enchanted ceiling reflected a clear, gray-blue sky dotted with thin clouds. The air smelled warm, toast and the leftover dampness of the morning. Suddenly, a flurry of wing beats filled the hall. Hundreds of owls streamed in through the high windows in a torrent of brown, gray, and white feathers. They filed down to the long tables in a flurry of paper and parcels. Somewhere nearby, a howler exploded, its shrill bark making Chien, Hermione, Neville, and Justin reflexively cover their ears. Outside the stained-glass panes, the heavy rain had just stopped. The trees had lost half their leaves, the lawns were speckled with brown. A silver-gray owl landed proudly beside Justin, clutching a thick parcel. Justin glanced once at Chien, who was busy attacking an apple pie, and let out a quiet sigh of relief. Inside the package, a heavy sweater and a pair of gloves, and tucked in was a photograph of 4 young wizards, shivering in the cold. Oddly, all 4 were looking at the boy in the center. His emerald-green eyes seemed to hold the warmth of a firelight even in the picture. On the back of the photograph, someone had written, "Dear Finch Fletchley, I've heard many stories, and I think the region around your eyes must be smaller than a lake. I can't imagine such eyes ever crying. Standing before you is like standing by a lake, the mist stretching forever. Cherish your friends. Forever proud of you, Liliana Justin," folded the note away and slipped out of the Great Hall when Chien didn't notice. At the same time, a spotted owl fluttered down at Hermione's place. She glanced at Chien too, then left briskly. Chien watched both of them go and felt a little puzzled. Had Justin and Hermione been acting odd lately? Later, in the classroom, the fireplace was blazing. Chien carried Standard Spells Primary and a small notebook that belonged to Professor Flitwick. As he stepped toward the hearth, a final cold gust hit, but he strode through it deliberately, and it subsided. On his usual seat lay a gold-edged letter, and beneath it, a small parcel. He paused, then opened the envelope. "Can't believe it's autumn already. The trees are starting to go bare. The good thing about autumn is you get to wear warm, pretty sweaters. Chien, stay a little warmer. Always loyal, Justin Finch Fletchley." Outside, an owl soared past the window and seemed to carry away the last of the autumn chill. There are 2 more consecutive chapters to be posted tomorrow morning. Chapter 109, 108, Quieting Charm. Outside the classroom, an owl perched on the stone wall and gave a loud hoot. It raised one claw to adjust its glasses like an acrobat. With the other, it gripped a parchment, its large eyes as bright as Professor McGonagall's when she appeared in the fireplace. Beside a soft cushion, to the left of a gold-edged letter, lay a sweater that looked both proper and comfortable. A note was pinned to the blue and white collar. "My mother sent many sweaters, not just for you. Your friend, Hermione Granger." To confirm it, 2 more sweaters had been placed to the left, clearly labeled, "For Justin, Neville." Chien's smile was slight, barely a curve at the corner of his mouth, but it caught the attention of the 3 boys peeking through the door crack. The owl flapped its wings and squawked loudly, "Young wizard! Stupid young wizard! Please be a little quieter." Justin clasped his hands. The squawking stopped. The owl turned its head 180 degrees. Justin cautiously opened one eye, as if he could see inside through the sky-blue door. Chien slipped the sweater into the wardrobe. Just when he thought that was all, he found another, noticeably larger sweater tucked beneath Justin's parcel. A crumpled note rested on it. Chien, I have nothing else. Chien's smile widened. His quick notes quill rattled as he scribbled on the back of the paper. Thank you. It's enough. By mid-morning, Chien had 3 new sweaters. With them came a different problem. What should he give in return? Gifts and favors could not keep a friendship alive by themselves. Friendships needed ongoing care, like anything else. The fire in the hearth crackled louder. Chien considered casting a quieting charm on the owl so its squawking wouldn't reach him, but instead he slid his wand back into its place and walked toward the door, carrying the 3 sweaters. Startled, the 3 boys who had been peeking fled up the spiral staircase. Ha! Stupid young wizard! The owl cried, and then, as if embarrassed, raised a claw to cover its beak. A raven claw. An owl shouldn't laugh like that. After confirming the hallway was empty, Chien pushed the main door open and headed up to Ravenclaw Tower, sweater bundle in hand and broom under his arm. The cold wind no longer bothered him. After all, he had 3 new sweaters. Or so he thought. At the next turn, 2 figures stepped out from behind a portrait. Fred and George Weasley. It's weird, how did Ron even know Green would go there? Fred said. George peered up at the portrait. Unless he's a clock, he wouldn't be that precise. Even then, it'd have to be a clock that gets paid. Fred began but froze mid-sentence, his face draining white. Are you imitating a snake? Oh, Professor Snape? He and George ducked as Snape's wide, dark robes swept past. He glared at them, flicked his wand at a hidden passage, and stalked away. Rare, truly rare, he muttered and disappeared. Fred stood stunned. We survived? George patted him down and nodded. Both were intact. This isn't right. Fred slapped George's hand away. Of course it isn't right. They resumed walking and bickering, oblivious to the extra weight in their hands. At the end of the corridor, Chien saw them, hair the color of orange flames, and the twins' gait was half leap, half swagger. That'll be 2 galleons, Fred called out, waving his hand. We almost got killed just now, Fred grumbled, then brightened. George hefted a set of robes and grinned. But once you take the job, the risk is yours. Fred fished a pair of boots from his bag and stuffed them into Chien's arms until they overflowed. No, Chien began. George's eyes fell to the 3 sweaters in Chien's hands and he narrowed one eye. A sweater hoarder? Fred laughed. No discounts for that. Let them talk. Chien wasn't sure he could leave empty-handed, so he drew 2 galleons from his undetectable extension charm bag and handed them over. After a brief thanks, he turned to go. He has an undetectable extension charm bag. Did you see that, George? If my eyes hadn't been nearly bitten out by a rattlesnake, George said, meaning he'd been distracted by fear, we'd be doing more business with him. Back in his dormitory, Chien discovered he might not have to choose among the sweaters after all. Tucked in the center of the pile was a pure black sweater with a green collar. A small note slipped inside read, simply, wear it, short and to the point. When he looked at the sweater, he inexplicably thought of the dark, sullen eyes at the entrance to the dungeons. He shrugged off the feeling and turned his attention to spells. His quieting charm was already at the beginner level and closing in on proficient. The only spell that truly worried him was the disillusionment charm. Compared with the quieting charm's 3 short paragraphs, Flitwick's notes on disillusionment sprawled for 10 pages. Its history, its subtleties, every detail. Seeing disillusionment charm at Unthurn only strengthened his resolve. A blue common talent might not be suited to such a complex spell, but he only needed 1 successful casting to convert it into 30 proficiency points on the panel. Once the spell reached apprentice level, he was sure new insights would follow. Stacking practice, not raw talent, was his belief. October's cold wind hissed through the corridors. Even the classroom fireplace guttered for a moment. The owl's one sharp hoot made the hearth burn brighter. Justin and Hermione pretended to be busy at their desks, but kept stealing furtive glances at Chien as he practiced the quieting charm, while Neville tended his shrieking snapdragon with meticulous care. Chapter 109, Shrieking Snapdragon. The shrieking snapdragon was a sentient vine that squeaked, and at the moment it clung to Neville's seedling box, emitting thin, frantic chirrups. Neville had probably over-fertilized them. The seedlings began to twist and writhe as if uncomfortable, and Neville scrambled for Shien's notes. Everyone helped in the greenhouse, but Shien's notebooks, those meticulous green notes, were the gold standard among the younger wizards. "Everything you can think of will be in it, and everything you haven't thought of will be in it," Neville recited, because that was the line that had lately been doing the rounds at the Gryffindor table. "If you still don't understand, you definitely haven't looked carefully." "Quieting charm, pueris." Shien's wand flashed before Neville could do anything sensible. The shrieking snapdragon's loud shrieks were muted to faint squeaks. Shien had been practicing the quieting charm, and the effect now was clearly beyond apprentice level, enough to cut the plant's noise down by some 80%. He made a mental note. The quieting charm had reached proficient. He also reminded himself that spell strength varied. 2 wizards could cast the same enchantment and get different results depending on state of mind, timing, and intent. Magic was subjective. The classroom settled back into its usual hum. Hermione was showing Neville a charm, and before long Neville would be tagging the many potted plants on their desk, small labels with Shien's, Hermione's, and Justin's names, and the plants' sowing dates. Neville had taken on most of the actual care, but everyone liked to mark their horticultural possessions. Shien worked his wand until the castle bells rang, then put it away with a satisfied sigh and thumbed through Professor Flitwick's notes for a while longer. They made their way to the Great Hall. The vaulted ceiling glowed dimly, like an overcast sky threatening rain, but inside it was dry and warm. The Ravenclaw table, where the 4 of them usually sat, was at the far end, near a large fireplace, built from vast, rough, honey-colored stones, now darkened with centuries of smoke until the grain had a glossy, oily black sheen. The fat friar sometimes drifted past on his way toward Gryffindor. The Ravenclaw table wasn't as loud as Gryffindor, nor filled with Slytherin boasting, and it didn't erupt into the kind of chaotic food riots Hufflepuff was known for. The Ravenclaws kept a respectable distance. That wasn't why the 4 chose the place, though. There were simply more puddings here, which tended to attract a certain kind of person who loved plants. A green, as they joked. Today, however, even Ravenclaw was noisy. The notice board by the staff table was crowded, and everyone nearby had clustered to read it. A fresh posting announced that at the end of October, on Halloween weekend, students in 3rd year and above could visit Hogsmeade, provided they had a guardian's signature. "First Hogsmeade trip," Fred exclaimed, high-fiving George. He tapped the notice like it was confirmation of some long-awaited prophecy. "End of October, eve of Halloween." George read aloud. "Brilliant." "I have to check Zonko's," Fred said. "My stink bombs are nearly gone." A nearby 3rd-year wizard slumped into his chair and made a small tragic sound of longing. His friend tried to cheer him up, but the conversation turned into the usual mix of half-remembered lore and rumor. "You know Hogsmeade, right? It's the only non-Muggle village in Britain. They say the tavern was the Goblin Rebellion HQ in 1612, and of course, there's the Shrieking Shack, the most haunted house in Britain." A Gryffindor nearby rolled his eyes at the fuss. "It's not all it's cracked up to be," he said earnestly. "The candy shop's good, Zonko's is dangerous, the Shrieking Shack is worth a look, but other than that, honestly, you won't miss much." The whole hall buzzed with that kind of chatter. Justin and Hermione got drawn into the discussion for a few moments, but Shien's mind was elsewhere, still turning over disillusionment charm theory. A sudden idea came. His quill scratched across his notebook with a neat, decisive swish. He hadn't noticed 3 students in the opposite corner watching them, boys with yellow and black scarves who had drifted closer, whispering to one another. "Tell me, Bruce, what are we doing?" one of them asked. Leon's face suggested he already had a guess, but he still looked sheepish when Bruce hesitated. The senior, Bruce, looped an arm around Leon and pieced her, as though revealing some bold plan. The single-word answer he offered, in a tone meant to be dramatic, was obvious to Shien even before Bruce shouted it. Disillusionment. Back in the classroom, Shien tried the spell on himself. The wand traced a careful arc and tapped his chest. A cold, thin film seemed to pass over him. For a moment, he felt the same strange, hollow sensation he'd felt in the staff room, as if he wore an invisible membrane that made his outline less solid. But it wasn't perfect. Apprentice-level disillusionment blunted his presence rather than erasing it. There were subtle shifts in light where he stood. Anyone looking closely would notice odd distortions. It was nothing like Professor Flitwick's last demonstration, where the subject had blended into the surroundings so completely that outline, shadow, and color were gone, like slipping under an invisibility cloak. Still, the disillusionment charm was practical, and Xian judged that reaching proficient would be more than adequate for everyday use. Interestingly, he found that casting it at night, or when he imagined himself hidden, made it feel more solid. Emotion and intention strengthened the effect, and precise gestures mattered. Practice paid off. Back at the table, the shrieking snapdragon in Neville's box no longer thrashed. It swayed quietly, stirred only by a draft through the window. Xian's plan lists shifted in his head. He would have to rethink which 3 spells he wanted to push to expert. Disillusionment was climbing the ranks faster than he'd expected. 110. The Liver King in progress. The Liver King in progress. Chapter 111. The grind continues. For ordinary wizards, natural talent matters more than hard work. Talented wizards pick things up instantly. Those without talent rarely succeed through effort alone. The wizarding world doesn't glorify grinding. Hermione studies diligently, but everyone credits her results to great talent rather than hard work. She truly is a prodigy who learns quickly. Hard work is just the icing on the cake. That meant unlocking new spell domain titles mattered most, because titles directly boosted Xian's spell aptitude. If he unlocked titles through 3 other expert-level spells and raised his talent, then grinding proficiency for other difficult spells would become far more efficient. It was the simple law of early effort powering later gains. Xian silently crossed out Disillusionment Charm on his notes and added Quieting Charm instead. So the first row of spells he planned to grind to expert became Finite Incantatem and Quieting Charm. While Xian practiced Quieting Charm on a shrieking snapdragon, 3 young wizards drifted into the classroom. Mr. Owl bellowed, "Young wizards! Stupid young wizards!" and let them in. "I heard Hogsmeade's got these huge jelly balls. If you suck on one, your feet lift a few inches off the ground," Justin said with a grin, then pulled a notebook labeled Spells from a sky-blue logbook shelf near the door and shoved his herbology notebook back into his bag. "And I want to try those fuzzy-tooth peppermints from Honeydukes. They're supposed to clean your teeth like dental floss when you hold them in your mouth. Sounds great." Hermione naturally picked up the herbology book and then set the Defense Against the Dark Arts notebook into the pile. Xian's notes were in universal use around class. Thanks to his clear summaries and precise, almost scientific descriptions, his notebooks made the old textbooks look vague, as if they'd been written in another language. With one glance, the younger students would set aside their old volumes as if those books had never been useful. "Oh, I really wish we could get to 3rd year faster," Justin sighed. "Perfect timing. Xian, is it Levitation Charm today?" "Yes." Xian nodded, and they began their daily practice. Justin worked on Levitation Charm, while Xian practiced Finite Incantatem. You practiced Finite Incantatem to an expert standard, proficiency 50. You practiced Finite Incantatem to an expert standard, proficiency. A small wooden card on the table spun twice and then stopped. Justin caught it. Xian silently flicked his wand without an incantation, and a form with their headshots fluttered into his hand. He wrote Proficient in the Justin Levitation Charm column and put the form back on the most accessible shelf by the door. Justin snatched it up, muttering, "This is great. Finally reached Proficient." Under Justin's Proficient Levitation Charm were Beginner, Finite Incantatem, and Beginner, Aguamenti. Hermione pretended to glance casually and then walked away with her nose in the air. She'd reached Proficient long ago. The wizarding world had no neat universal taxonomy for a wizard's overall spellcasting level. Outside of OWL exams, which label results outstanding, exceeds expectations, or acceptable, there was no standard that usefully compared individual spell proficiencies. For different wizards, proficiencies could vary wildly from spell to spell. The Ministry would find it impractical to measure every wizard's level for every spell. The work would be tedious and largely pointless, since spells change with a caster's state and intensity. Young wizards ended up unable to judge their true level, and so lost interest in practicing. Xian's experiment with finite incantatum changed that. He'd wanted to know which proficiency levels of finite incantatum could terminate which spells, and the results were surprisingly effective. Basing his system on his own performance at different proficiencies made his assessments unusually accurate. His new classification of mastery stages lit a fire under the students. Suddenly they felt like bosses with health bars, and it felt wrong not to cast a few spells when a wand was in their hands. For spells or curses of equivalent difficulty, finite incantatum of the same proficiency can dispel them pretty easily, Xian noted, then scribbled another line in his notebook. The effect on higher-level spells drops off sharply. Some difficult, powerful spells cannot be ended by finite incantatum alone. Maintenance is always harder than casting and demands more magic. Simply stopping the flow of magic is rarely feasible. He wondered if that was why some powerful spells required specific counterspells, Transfiguration being reversed by the Restoration charm, Sectum Sempra needing its own counterspell. The sky outside dimmed into a pale purple haze, and the cold cut through. Xian stowed his wand by the warm fireplace. His finite incantatum had climbed from 2200 3000 to 226 3000, 450 proficiency points added. It looked like he would unlock the expert tier of finite incantatum tonight. Nonverbal finite incantatum was simpler for him than nonverbal levitation had been. The difficulty with nonverbal spells is the physical urge to speak the incantation. Wizards raised to vocalize feel awkward trying to be silent, lips tightening or twitching as they fight the compulsion. Xian had already worked through that with his levitation practice. The three requirements for nonverbal casting, emotional control, firm will, and precise execution, posed no real challenge for him. So when he stood perfectly still, silently and gracefully waved his wand, and dispelled all of Justin's aguamenti without uttering a word, Hermione couldn't help but stare, and Neville gaped as if his mouth could fit a goose egg. Looking at his own pitiful levitation charm on the form, a long dormant surge of motivation filled Mr. Longbottom's chest. This is what being a wizard really is. Justin's praise was always sincere. But it's time to let the upperclassmen have the classroom. N. Shall we head out? Chapter 1-12, Hogsmeade Week. On the lawn behind the castle, three young wizards in thick robes stepped out once again. They paid no mind to the thunder rolling overhead, the wind howling against the castle walls, or the branches creaking and snapping in the distant forbidden forest. In a few hours, they would be facing the storm in the greenhouse, but for now their expressions were calm. They chatted and even laughed occasionally. Mostly, it was Justin doing the talking, Xian nodding along, and Neville smiling shyly. A difficult task is easier to bear when you share it with others. The little comforts of company outweighed the hardship. Before they reached the greenhouse, the boisterous voices of the seniors reached them. "Bruce, you idiot! Stay away from that Mimbleless Mimbletonia!" Through the stained glass window of Greenhouse 3, Xian could see what had happened. Senior Leon was waving his wand to move other plants out of the way when Senior Bruce, having provoked the Mimbleless Mimbletonia, darted behind Professor Peaster. The plant's tendril-like vines lashed wildly. As 1,000 magical herbs and fungi describes it, the Mimbleless Mimbletonia looks like a knobbled tree stump and produces pods as large as grapefruits. Anyone who tries to take its pods will find its tentacle-like vines attacking them. Bruce had clearly touched a fruit. Just before the plant could strike, Professor Pister, as if he had eyes in the back of his head, dodged Bruce with a practiced movement, but the vines whipped Bruce's shoulder anyway. He yelped twice and instantly became much more subdued. Professor Sprout peered out, smiling as she did so, and then bustled briskly from Greenhouse 3. Ah, her new sprouts were arriving. Thanks to them, Greenhouse 1 stayed orderly. Because the greenhouses could be dangerous, the work had always been divided. The professor took Greenhouse 7, the most hazardous, and the one rumored to contain a small humping willow. Senior Bruce and his group usually handled Greenhouse 3, and Xian's group looked after Greenhouse 1. At the entrance to Greenhouse 1, Xian saw Senior Bruce and his companions filing into Greenhouse 3, Bruce still looking disheveled and muddy. The Mimblelus Mimbletonia's vines continued to wave angrily behind them. Aha! Bruce called, making a face at the greenhouse. Idiot. Senior Leon regarded the bedraggled Bruce with a look of mild exasperation. This boy liked to stir up trouble. Then Bruce spotted Chien. Oh, look, little green, he cried, eyes lighting up. You must be looking forward to Hogsmeade, aren't you? He leaned in as if sharing a secret and flashed a grin. Chien would have almost forgotten Hogsmeade existed if Bruce hadn't mentioned it. The trip didn't concern the younger students much. Still, seeing Bruce's expectant face, Chien did his best to look enthusiastic. Oh, I mean, little green, I'll pay you back. Not just for that bet or the howler. Bruce raised an eyebrow, and for a moment his expression sharpened from jolly to shrewd. Take it, and choose well, he said, then hummed a tune and dragged Leon, who was spluttering pumpkin juice, and Peaster, who had just been handed seeds by Professor Sprout, away. From across the lawn, Chien could hear Bruce's loud, lingering calls. Once inside the greenhouse, Chien casually opened the envelope he carried. Lately, he felt he'd been getting too much post, but of course that was partly because he said little. The letter inside, in Bruce's unmistakable scrawl, made him smile. Dear little green, surprised to receive this Hogsmeade shopping list? I'd love to buy everything for you lot, but Leon refused to let me touch his coin pouch. It would have been strange if Leon had agreed. Chien read on. Good news. Peaster agreed to let me use his wallet to pay for your purchases, just yours. So shop boldly. Don't worry about your wallet. Chien pictured Professor Peaster's honest, gentle face. The letter continued. You can share the list with friends. Remember Hufflepuff's motto, 2. Share. Don't worry about me carrying it all. I won't let Leon's or Pister's hands, shoulders, or necks go idle. But don't invite too many people, or Pister's neck won't bear the weight. Attached is the list. Dervish and Banges, magical repair tools, Honeyduke Sweet Shop, Lollipop Quills, Bertie Bott's every flavor beans, Scribulous writing implements, auto-correcting ink, auto-answering quills, homework planners. Hogsmeade Week suddenly felt very relevant to Chien. He studied the attached list and felt his anticipation grow. There were so many interesting things in the wizarding world. He planned to buy more parchment and ink, of course, but a few items stood out. The homework planner, a little enchanted notebook that tracked a student's progress, was especially tempting. It reminded you to finish assignments and wouldn't let you do what you liked until your tasks were done. That alone would save Chien a lot of time. Another was Eternal Ink, special ink that carried a trace of magic and never faded. The possibilities made him a little breathless. October had brought colder weather, more rain, and earlier nights, but the mud and wind and heavy showers couldn't dampen the three friends' spirits as they left the greenhouse. You mean the seniors are going to help us shop in Hogsmeade? Justin asked, hardly believing it. They had just been envying the older students, and now luck had landed at their feet. We have to tell Hermione, Justin whispered, eyes shining. She's read all the descriptions of Hogsmeade 1,000,000 times. Chien pulled 7 pieces of parchment from the back of Bruce's letter. Neville and Justin's eyes fixed on them. They were already imagining the trip and all the treasures it might bring. Prefect Bruce had given Sean 7 small pieces of parchment. On the back of each was written, Green's friends are our friends, and we are happy to help. Justin and Neville were still talking excitedly about what to buy, letters in hand, their excitement undimmed even after they went into the classroom. Oh, Hermione, guess what Sean got from the greenhouse? Justin said with a grin to Hermione, who was practicing the levitation charm. Hermione was thumbing through Standard Book of Spells, grade 6, trying to puzzle out nonverbal spells. She raised an eyebrow. Dittany seeds? 100 times better than that. Sean set one of the small pieces of parchment down on Hermione's desk. Its yellow and black edges shimmered with a soft glow, and Hermione couldn't take her eyes off it. Naturally, she leaned into the discussion. Sean settled onto the soft, sky-blue cushion by the fireplace. Justin had put a small round table there, and 3 steaming cups of milk were arranged on it. Sean sipped and opened the Book of Magical Runes. Nearby, Justin and the others clustered around another log table, trading ideas. I have to go to Madame Putafoot's, Justin was saying. They say the trees in Hogsmeade are hung with enchanted candles at every holiday. Maybe they sell ones you could use to light the classroom, and dervish and banges. I want to see sneakoscopes and all that. How are they different from magnifying glasses? It's so exciting. He quickly wrote down his list and then looked to Sean. Sean, can the prefects carry all this for us? Sean remembered Prefect Peister's grumpy look, but Prefect Bruce had written not to worry. After all, they were wizards. Spells could do the heavy lifting. He nodded. Yes. Great. Hermione, what about you? Justin crowed. There are so many things I want from Scrivenshaft's quill shop, Justin went on. Black and gold pheasant quills, rainbow ink, extra-large quills. Hermione went over the list carefully, finding it hard to choose. Justin glanced at Neville. All right, Neville, what about you? Gloves, flower pots, Neville muttered. Justin almost didn't need to ask. He could already picture it. The moment they reached Hogsmeade, Hermione and Sean would head straight for Scrivenshaft's. Neville would be glued to the flower pots at Dervish and Banges, and Justin himself most wanted to explore Honeydukes. The enchanted sweets there sounded irresistible. The fire crackled on. Sean emerged from his books and looked at the 3 pieces of parchment still in his hand, wondering who to give them to. Hogsmeade, the only all-wizard village in Britain, had been founded by Hengist of Woodcroft. Hogwarts students could visit there on weekends. The train stopped at Hogsmeade Station, and a short path led from the station past a fork up to the village and onto the gates of Hogwarts. It wasn't large, but it was full of fascinating shops. Zonko's joke shop with hiccup sweets and dung bombs, the Owl Post, Madame Malkin's robes for all occasions, Dervish and Banges for magical instruments, and of course Scrivenshafts and Honeydukes. The classroom chatter went on until curfew. When it was time to part, the few of them reluctantly handed Sean the parchments they hadn't filled to the brim, but had chosen carefully. Sean skimmed the lists. Bertie Bott's every flavor beans, chocolate frogs, Drubel's best blowing gum, ice mice, fudge flies, and exploding bonbons that made you breathe fire. Oh, by the way, Sean, please thank the prefects for us, Justin said. Sean nodded. On the way back to the common room, he didn't see Sir Cadogan in the corridor. He guessed the knight was still in his portrait, wrestling with the sword embedded in the ground. He tucked the 3 small parchments into his bag and let a few plans form in his mind. In the Ravenclaw common room, the older students were abuzz with Hogsmeade plans, while the younger ones watched enviously. Merlin, I heard that some Hufflepuff prefects help younger students buy things. Why doesn't Ravenclaw do that? Someone complained. Michael, buried in a book, muttered, It would be troublesome. No one wants to carry things for you when they're having fun, unless you hand them enough galleons. Anthony, flipping pages, added, Someone in Slytherin offered 1 galleon, and it was accepted right away. 1 galleon, Michael sighed, imagining spending that much on sweets. Then, spotting what Sean had been reading, he brightened. What's that, Sean? Your Quidditch skills guide? I'll have to take a proper look. After a short pause, Michael picked up his own parchment and scanned it. Hogsmeade shopping list. Merlin's fizzing whizbees, he exclaimed. In the end, Sean handed out the lists, narrow, small, and thick pages, each carrying its own expectant hopes. Justin wanted things to decorate the classroom. Everyone agreed the classroom could do with more life, even if it was always tidy. Hermione, egged on by Justin, bought a variety of remarkable candies. Neville spent nearly all his money on different flower pots. As for Sean, whenever he thought of Justin and the others' eager faces, he smiled softly. Chapter 114, 113, The Untouchable Hand. Saturday night at Hogwarts was louder than usual. The students who had gone to Hogsmeade had returned, still brimming with excitement. At times like this, Mr. Filch was busier than ever, forever on the lookout for mischief, especially from the 2 audacious red-haired students. Those 2 had done more than enough to make him dislike all redheads. As Filch finished his work for the day and prepared to slip back to his dim caretaker's office, Chien passed by, having just finished brewing a pot of proficient-level swelling solution. Above the potions section in his notebook, he had jotted his recent spell progress. The quieting charm was already proficient, and finite incantatem had reached expert. Chien could now dismiss Justin's slapped-up levitation charm without even speaking the words. Professor Flitwick had used a series of small hexes to test his practical combat skills. Chien dispelled all of them easily. When Flitwick tried slightly stronger hexes, Shien could barely block them without chanting, but with the words spoken, his finite incantatum could repel almost anything. Some weaker curses simply couldn't pierce his defense. Among the first years, he could now safely say his defenses were unmatched. Combined with his transfiguration work and his spell-combining techniques, Shien felt he could handle lower-tier opponents without trouble. Against stronger students, though, the outcome remained uncertain. So he kept training, waiting for the quieting charm to reach expert. When it did, he would unlock a new spell title and increase his magic aptitude, then continue combining spells to improve his combat prowess. The corridor was empty. Madame Norris was nowhere to be seen. Bruce had set the meeting time with Shien 2 hours later than most students returned. It was 2 hours of life and death, Bruce had said. Leon had wanted to turn back to the castle before Bruce finished speaking, as if Bruce might be up to the sort of prank that would coat the joke shop owner's hat with itching powder. Bruce merely grunted and hauled him on. There was still time before the appointed hour. From the caretaker's office came the familiar, sharp mewing of Madame Norris and Filch's thin, reedy laughter. Shien smiled softly. No student hated Filch forever, but there would always be students who did. After tidying the office, Shien slipped his wand away. Thanks to the scouring charm's wide use, his scouring charm was already proficient. Soon he'd be able to clean the floor with a flick like the professor's. He glanced at the wooden cabinet that had collapsed for the umpteenth time and, with the reparo charm he'd just learned, set it right. Reparo. The wood seemed to roll back the clock. The splits closed, dust flew back into the seams, and the cabinet sat whole again. Shien's lips curved. He was still thrilled by the small wonders of magic. He left the office quietly and heard a loud meow behind him. He squatted, waiting for Madame Norris to pounce. Perhaps it was because Shien always helped Filch clean, because Justin's dried fish was especially nutritious, or simply because she liked being fussed over. Madame Norris had gotten noticeably plumper. When she stepped up onto his shoulder, Shien felt the extra weight and smiled. You have gained the closeness of the magical creature Catling to a proficient standard. Proficiency, pen. Not close, 90. Apprentice-level magical creature closeness can unlock the apprentice-level title in the magical creatures field. He was just a little short of unlocking the magical creatures talent. Shien produced another dried fish from his bag, Justin's apple-flavored variety. Magic touched every corner of life here. Under the low lamp in the caretaker's office, Filch's usual grim face had softened for a long time. He stood, staring down the corridor, unable to step out of the shadows. He had a scarf he'd been saving for a while. Madame Norris purred on his shoulder. Filch was a squib. Squibs were rare in the wizarding world and suffered heavy discrimination. Pureblood families often disowned them. The example of Marius Black was known to all, and the Ministry of Magic didn't even record their births properly. The name squib fit, like a small fireworks fuse, only capable of a feeble pop. Most squibs lived frugal, overlooked lives on the edges of society. Their bitterness, when it came from deep down. Their voices rarely reached anyone. There were exceptions. Headmaster Dumbledore had kindly given Filch a post despite his lack of magic, and that small mercy meant everything to him. And there were occasional kind students, Shien among them, whose considerate actions softened his heart. That was why Filch hated students who flagrantly broke rules. They could cast spells every day, play carelessly, leave damage for him to worry about, and yet had no idea how much someone without magic might envy them. Shien stroked Madame Norris's head. As the time for meeting Bruce drew near, he set the cat down and walked toward the great hall. Filch watched him go until he was out of sight, then tucked the scarf back into the wardrobe. A new sweater. That alone was enough. The long gaze dissipated. Some things are better kept tucked away in the heart. Too many lonely people fear the first step. So when Shien reappeared at Filch's door, holding a biting doorknob, Filch's expression turned as terrified as if he'd seen a troll. "Mr. Filch, this is something I had a Hufflepuff senior help me get," Shien said. He fitted the contraption to the office door, cast a disillusionment charm on the original knob, and handed Filch a bite-proof glove. The biting doorknob was a low-end model, more of a sharp deterrent than a vicious weapon. It would give any meddling student a sharp surprise, but not enough to lose them house points. Filch stared at Chien for a moment, fumbled with the glove, then broke into a small, satisfied clap, nodded to himself, thanked Chien politely, and shuffled away. Even then, it seemed he hadn't fully taken it in. Chien considered it a small kindness, less cleaning for him and a harmless lesson for the troublemakers. Outside, the cold wind still howled. At the entrance to the caretaker's office, Filch paused, the new scarf in his hands. For a moment, his outstretched hand touched nothing at all, as if he were holding both the scarf and an invisible weight. Then he turned back inside, and the corridor swallowed him. Chapter 115, The Gifted Hope Room. In the distance, the dim sky swallowed the last pine needle. By the quiet crackle of the hearth, Filch's anti-bite gloves trembled in the cold draft. Filch looked down as a sliver of sunset light fell into his hand. Chien walked briskly down the corridor. The castle never seemed to stop humming. Senior Bruce had returned with a pile of things for them, including a handful of floating candles. But when Chien saw him, Bruce did not look well. His hair was askew, his robes dusted with unknown powder, and his boots caked in mud. Senior Peaster and Senior Leon weren't much better. Senior Leon, all aflutter, had grabbed Senior Bruce by the arm and disappeared toward the Great Hall entrance. Senior Bruce, Chien started, then hesitated before asking what had happened. "Oh, him," Senior Pister said with a simple, honest smile. "He swapped all the toffees and honeydukes for hiccup sweets." The wooden staircase in the shop, filled with hiccuping witches and wizards, you could hear them from the dungeons, louder than the bell. Chien was speechless. Pulling a face, he noticed small holes in Senior Peaster's robes. "He set off fireworks when someone was confessing," Pister went on. "The firework cannon toppled, and the shell exploded right into that wizard's arms. And that wizard happened to be very practiced with the fireball spell." Hermione, standing by the Great Hall entrance, gaped. Neville was already shivering at the mental image. "And," Pister added, "he slipped itching powder into someone's hair growth potion and told them, 'It's supposed to itch. That means your hair is growing.'" At that, CN and the others found that Senior Bruce's screams as he was hauled away were somehow less shocking. "Sometimes we wonder if he should have gone to Gryffindor," Pister said calmly, placing a fudge fly into CN's hand before leaving. Fudge flies, also called minister flies, were an odd little treat, given the name's connection to the Minister of Magic. Even odder was what they found when they pushed open their classroom door. It had been transformed. "Just put it here, Chien," Justin said, bustling about with too much enthusiasm to be idle. Though he claimed he could do it all himself, Chien and the others couldn't stand by and watch. Justin hung floating candles in every corner, especially above the students' desks, so each work surface had bright light. Senior Bruce helped bring 3 pumpkin lanterns containing ever-burning candles, enchanted to burn indefinitely. Chien couldn't quite tell the difference between floating candles and ever-burning candles, but that didn't stop him from tucking the pumpkin lanterns beneath the 2 log tables. Their warm light slowly painted a fanged, hollow mouth shape across the blankets. Another pumpkin lantern sat inside the wooden cabinet by the entrance, next to Chien's notebook. The cabinet's light was dim. Neville often grabbed the wrong things. Last time he mixed up his herbology and potions notes. Beside the cabinet, Justin installed a small switch-like device, the candle controller. The room didn't need to be this bright at all times. After a long stretch of work, the small room was utterly changed. Carpets lay near both log tables, soft couches rested on top, and pumpkin lanterns glowed at intervals. Wooden cabinets were hung with candles and crammed with notes and each student's spell progress charts. Green plants were placed on every desk. Plants were everywhere, in fact, and Neville, with a shy, pleased smile, had taken on the role of caretaker. At the entrance, Justin positioned a mirror, a magic, talking mirror, meant to remind anyone who looked into it to mind their appearance and manners. When Neville stood before it, the mirror shouted, "Stand up straight. Tuck in your shirt. Straighten your clothes, you slob." Neville jumped and hurried to obey, flustered. Spells flew about the room as everyone tidied and improved every neglected corner. The scouring charm and levitation charm were in constant use. Compared with the monotony of ordinary practice, the group was full of energy. By the time they finished, everyone was exhausted and satisfied. Xian's levitation charm had shot from expert 110,9,000 to expert 609,000, and his scouring charm climbed from proficient 103,000 to proficient 303,000. There's a problem, Justin said during a break. If we call this a classroom, what makes it different from any other classroom? They all stared for a moment. We need a name, Hermione said, staring blankly at the new decor. So when we say classroom, we know which one we mean. Her idea was met with quick approval. Justin brightened. We need something special, a name that reflects what we do here. How about after-school study base? Hermione offered, glancing instinctively at CN, who had recovered quickly after taking his potion and was already immersed in a Transfiguration notebook. CN nodded. Hey, you two are being too casual, Justin objected, half laughing. Neville, any ideas? Warm room, Neville muttered, almost absent-mindedly. That's hard to use as a proper name, but it's not bad, Justin said, frowning, clearly not confident in relying on the three in front of him. Then Justin's face lit up. The gifted Hope Room, or Hope Cottage for short. He clapped his hands together. It suggests the room itself is a gift, meant to nurture and carry hope, a safe harbor where anyone who comes in can recover the hope they were given. Neville gaped, stunned, and for a moment could only croak, "Gua wa gua." Not bad, Hermione said, lifting her chin in approval. Xian? Good, Xian said simply, thinking he had said too little and then adding after a pause, good. Then it's decided, Justin exclaimed. We need to hang a sign with the name on it. Chapter 16, The Magic of Transfiguration. October was drawing to a close in a storm of wind and rain, and November was approaching. Hogwarts felt like frozen iron, frost every morning, icy winds that bit at hands and cheeks. The sky and the great hall ceiling had taken on a pale blue-gray. The mountains around the castle wore caps of snow. Inside the castle, the temperature had dropped until many students wore thick dragonhide gloves during corridor breaks. Xian stood outside the Transfiguration classroom door, his breath misting in the cold, and knocked gently. Mr. Green, I've told you many times, no need to knock, just come in, child, came a gentle voice from inside. He pushed the door open. Even though Professor McGonagall had said it more than once, Xian didn't plan to break the habit. Private space felt sensitive and inviolable to him. The key she had given him did not mean he could barge in whenever he wished. Inside, the fireplace burned cheerfully. Lately, Professor McGonagall had been constantly busy, sitting in a tall chair, grading homework, dealing with the mistakes of young wizards, as if preparing for something. Regarding the transformation from self to living creature, Mr. Green, that requires even more caution, she said. So today we will learn about the transfiguration of objects into magic. Professor McGonagall paused her grading and waved her wand. The flames in the hearth flared up, their tongues almost licking Xian's cheeks. She waved again, and the flames reshaped themselves into the form of a small lizard that scuttled back into the fireplace. This kind of advanced transfiguration requires a stronger will and a higher level of magic. Importantly, when you infuse magic into the object you choose, you must believe that it inherently possesses magic. Xian had already read the notes McGonagall had given him. Hearing her say it aloud deepened his understanding. Today, you will learn to infuse this magic into the flames of the fireplace. Her eyebrows and eyes softened. The student in front of her had spent only 3 weeks memorizing the 2 notebooks she had given him and had read 3 Transfiguration textbooks. McGonagall had never seen Green empty-handed in the corridor. For 6th years, finishing a book in 3 weeks would be considered good. Xian had done much more. Xian approached the fireplace with curiosity. The flames suddenly leaped higher, making him reflexively take a step back. He held his notebook, the pages slightly yellowed at the edges by the hearth, and glanced at the reminder scrawled inside. Specific, clear intention, firm belief, sufficient will. That was the essence of transfiguration. At the expert level, incantations were no longer necessary. This level corresponded roughly to adult wizards, though only a few older wizards attained it. Xian waved his wand. The flames responded, leaping more noticeably. He pictured them as dancing shapes and guided them according to McGonagall's notes. the step completed easily. You practiced advanced transfiguration to an apprentice standard, proficiency. You practiced advanced transfiguration to an apprentice standard. In a short while, Shien could make the flames dance with a flick of his wand. It was only a tiny flicker, but it pleased Professor McGonagall. Very good, Mr. Green. Next, try controlling more flames. She said it with satisfaction. Stepping out of the Transfiguration office, Shien knew he had already crossed halfway through the threshold into advanced transfiguration. There remained a large gap between his work and McGonagall's ability to conjure a fire salamander, but it was a promising start. As McGonagall had told him, most wizards, when attempting this transfiguration for the first time, cannot make the flames react at all. They would have to practice continuously for at least a month before achieving this. Shien suspected his title helped. Transfiguration Master greatly enhances the perception from non-magic to magic in the field of transfiguration. That heightened perception always helped him find the trick to making the flames obedient. After he left, the Transfiguration classroom still glowed with firelight. McGonagall waved her wand, and a drawer turned into a piglet, which elegantly handed her an envelope filled with thick stationery. Seeing the letters, her expression softened even further. In the corridor, Shien pulled his scarf up against the wind and adjusted his thick gloves. He looked at the notes in his hand. A pure black cover, a first page full of warnings, Professor Flitwick's notes on the dark arts. The dark arts made Headmaster Dumbledore uneasy, but that did not mean Shien would entirely give up studying them. Flitwick had said, "The dark arts are like a blade. Those with malicious intent use them for dirty purposes, but ultimately they are closely related to the user's objectives." One reason Shien wanted to study them was that progress in the dark arts could be very rapid. More spells were more trump cards, and the more a wizard knew, the stronger he became. Another reason was that Professor Flitwick had taken charge of teaching him. Excellent! Oh, what astonishing talent! Professor Flitwick paced in the charms classroom, muttering to himself, "It must be me. I must keep a close eye on this child. Fortunately, it's little Green." He restored the books Shien had sent flying with a flourish of his wand. During this period, almost every practice of Shien's in charms took place under Flitwick's watchful eye. You practiced the knockback jinx to an expert standard, proficiency. You practiced the knockback jinx to a master standard, proficiency. "Professor, goodbye," Shien said as the sun set and shadows lengthened. He left the charms classroom and, in the quiet corridor, opened his panel. "You are a rare genius in the field of the dark arts throughout history. The dark arts will actively embrace you. You are the born king of the dark arts." Shien quickly skipped past the florid pronouncement. Knockback jinx. Expert. The expert-level knockback jinx was instant and silent. Combined with the levitation charm, which had many uses, Shien's combat capability astonished Professor Flitwick. Underestimate him, and an adult wizard might very well take a nasty tumble. "Filius, unsettling talent, isn't it?" an old voice said from the classroom doorway. "But a reassuring wizard," replied the old man beside him. Professor Flitwick's beard twitched at the compliment. The old wizard beside him did not deny it. He only nodded slightly. Chapter 117, Halloween Plan. For a long time after that, Shien had been planning for one thing, Halloween. Early one morning, he woke to the sweet, tempting scent of roasted pumpkin drifting down the corridor. He peered out at the stained glass window. The Quidditch pitch looked especially vast beneath the gray sky. An unusually large figure was crossing the withered yellow lawn like a small hill, Hagrid, cradling an enormous pumpkin. It was astonishingly huge, its orange skin already carved into a grinning, ghastly face, Hagrid's furry moleskin coat visible through the empty eye sockets. Few people realized that the pumpkins used for Hogwarts' Halloween lanterns were grown by him, each one as big as a shed. Hope Cottage had been decorated with bats, and Justin was busy making sweets, a faint milky scent rising from the table. The room door opened softly and then closed just as quietly. No one stood in the doorway. Hermione was diligently practicing the quieting charm, but whenever she tried to be silent, she found herself distracted. That distraction made her notice Neville, who was visibly trembling by the door, lips quivering as if he wanted to say something but couldn't. Shien! Shien! Hermione and Justin spoke in unison, and Shien stepped into view as if he had been cloaked and then shed the invisibility. His curiosity was evident on his face, as though he were waiting for something. The smell gave you away, Shien, Justin said with a smile, shaping the soft candy dough. The light would have done it at night. Hermione frowned, incredulous. Is that a disillusionment charm? Shien nodded. Yes, I thought it was some magical item at first. It's supposed to be a spell only upper years learn. I've only seen it in Standard Book of Spells, grade 6. Hermione looked at the feather that still wouldn't fall perfectly silent, then at Shien, a little troubled. She hadn't even finished Standard Spells, primary, let alone grade 6. There were 2 whole books between them. Neville, who had been trembling, immediately relaxed when he realized who it was. Oh, it's Shien. The small interlude ended. Shien's attention returned to the shrieking snapdragon on the table, which liked to make little squeaking noises and had been faithfully accompanying him as he practiced the quieting charm. Today his skill with the spell improved. You practiced the quieting charm to expert level. Prophecies, a new spell domain title, has been unlocked. Shien opened the panel with anticipation. Title: Proficient in Spells. Greatly increases perception of spells. Greatly enhances spell talent. Increased perception. During the afternoon's disillusionment charm practice, Shien had felt the effect. With sharper perception, he could better sense subtle changes in a spell's intensity and adjust pronunciation and gestures accordingly. That helped him progress quickly from beginner to a higher level of control. He opened the panel again and found more information. Name. Title: Proficient in Spells. Levitation Charm. Expert. Finite Incantatum. Expert. Quieting Charm. Expert. Disillusionment Charm. Beginner. Advancement. 12 expert level spells or 5 master level spells to unlock the expert level title in the spell domain. Shien stared at the requirement, thinking he must have misread it. He closed the panel and opened it again to be sure. The line was clear this time, and he accepted it calmly. Madame Miranda's lessons in magical theory echoed in his mind. One fact of learning magic is to master as many spells as possible, including many ancient ones. The more magic you know, the more you can do, she had said. Another fact is that after mastering a spell, you must continuously practice to become proficient. There's a huge difference between proficient casting and clumsy casting. In short, the more spells you know, the stronger you are. The more proficient you are at casting them, the stronger you become. The panel's advancement system combined both ideas, but becoming a spell expert was clearly not easy. From previous notes, Shien suspected that proficient described many upper-year students and adult wizards. Expert might be the level of an auror, master, the level of a professor. Beyond that, he had no frame of reference. Sitting in front of the shrieking snapdragon, sipping hot pumpkin juice and furiously scribbling in his quick notes, Shien thought about how little time remained until Halloween. For most first years, it was a holiday to play wildly, but for him, it meant changes were coming. On Halloween Eve, Professor Quirrell would release a troll to cover his theft of the Philosopher's Stone, and Hermione would face grave danger in the girls' lavatory. The arrival of the troll would also mark the official start of Harry and Lord Voldemort's second confrontation. The boy who lived, the greatest white wizard, and the Dark Lord, fated to be drawn into a drama where, as the prophecy put it, one must die by the hand of the other. For Shien, however, the stability of that plotline was the most useful thing. He could learn magic under relatively safe conditions. In the original storyline, the troll's appearance, the first years defeating it, and passing the test of the fourth-floor room formed the main arc for their year. Logically, Dumbledore should have everything under control, but Shien couldn't ignore one problem. There was no wizard named Shien Green in the original story. What if his presence introduced variables? Would Hermione truly be in danger? Would others be endangered? So he made a plan, control what he could, and remain as invisible to danger as possible. If he could avoid Lord Voldemort and keep the troll under subtle, constant observation, he would notice any deviations in time. For this plan, the disillusionment charm and his own combat ability were crucial. Chapter 118, Collection of Notes. The disillusionment charm would keep him from being seen, and his practical skills would let him turn the tide of a fight if necessary. Still, if Lord Voldemort himself decided to go on a slaughter, Shi-En would definitely hide as far away as he could. That was an extremely improbable scenario, though. For it to happen, Dumbledore would have to let Voldemort slip away without noticing, far less likely than Shi-En facing Voldemort in the first place. More than that, Voldemort would need someone who didn't want the Philosopher's Stone to handle it for him, since he could not touch it himself. In short, the whole first book was less a chronicle of Harry's adventures than Dumbledore's plan to trap Voldemort. Dumbledore suspected Albania was Voldemort's refuge. Quirrell went there to investigate and came back changed, and Dumbledore had Snape keep an eye on him. With Dumbledore steering the big picture, Shi-En had less to fear. His immediate concerns were simple: avoid Professor Quirrell, who was now undeniably dangerous, and watch out for the troll. Those were the only real threats a first year needed to worry about. Beyond that, his priority was staying hidden and not diverting the plot. It was another morning. The corridor buzzed with laughter and running students. Many of them carried thick, green-covered notebooks. Outside the stained glass windows, a groundskeeper could be seen hauling pumpkins across the lawn. Hermione and Justin walked ahead, with Neville trailing, head down. Hermione sighed at him. "Neville, if you don't look up soon, I'm afraid the mirror will start shouting again." Hermione had always felt particularly protective of Neville, especially after learning about his parents' condition. To her, he wore the label "poor thing, don't bully him," and that made her both exasperated and anxious. "By the way, Hermione, what do you think of that collection?" Justin asked. "It's very good," she replied, holding a sky-blue copy of the notebook. She was about to praise it when a cold draft swept the corridor. The chilly air made all three of them eager for the roaring fire in the common room. In the comparatively empty corridor, Justin turned his head slightly and fixed his gaze on a corner. He whispered, "Shi-En?" A figure stepped out slowly into the corridor. Neville couldn't help but blurt out, while Hermione clasped a hand over her mouth. "Yes, it's me," Shi-En said. He nodded, content that Hermione hadn't really noticed him. Staying unnoticed was the main thing. Then he glanced at Justin and sighed. He'd been found out. Justin beamed. "Oh, Shi-En, your disillusionment charm has improved again. But still, come on. This is one thing I refuse to lose," Justin said, the competitive edge clear in his voice. It reminded Shi-En of the way he'd practiced finite incantatem. At first, he couldn't break Justin's beginner levitation charm, and later he could interrupt Justin's more advanced attempts. His progress always surprised everyone. Shi-En sighed again and knocked on the door to the Transfiguration office. "Come in, child," came Professor McGonagall's voice. Professor McGonagall looked busier than ever, buried under grading and lesson plans since he'd begun advanced Transfiguration. Even so, whenever Shi-En practiced, she stopped everything to watch closely, correcting his posture and pointing out mistakes. Professor Snape did the same, if brusquely, until class ended and twilight had begun to fall. Leaving Transfiguration, Shi-En found Harry and Ron by the suit of armor, surrounded by a small crowd. "Shi-En's here," Ron called, and the students turned toward him with appreciation and excitement. Students from Gryffindor, Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff, and even some Slytherins were gathered there. Shi-En squinted at a small boy wrapped in a Slytherin scarf near Michael and felt a momentary confusion. "Today's the first day the Green Collection appeared, Shi-En. We're here to thank you for providing a portion of it," Ron said, practically vibrating. From Ron's excited rambling, Shi-En pieced it together. Justin had organized many of his notes, and after talking with Shi-En, released a small portion of them for free, the opening move in a plan to sell notes for other subjects. The free samples were meant to spark interest, but there was an unforeseen variable: Harry and Ron. With some of those notes, Gryffindor students had recently scored a lot of points, and Justin's plan exploded into popularity before it could even properly launch. In the mad scramble, Justin had run out of his own copies. There had only been 10 copies to begin with, and they covered only material learned before Halloween, but that had been enough to give students a weekend free of homework worries. An excited Ron had rounded up the kids who'd snagged the free notes to come thank Shi-En. By the time Xian left the corridor, his arms were full of candies and small thank you gifts. No wonder Justin had stuffed so many sweets into his bag that morning. Xian barely had enough to reciprocate. Later, in the staff room, Dumbledore steepled his fingers and smiled. "It seems our Mr. Green is quite popular, isn't he?" he said. Professor McGonagall's face tightened. "Albus, you've been rather focused on him lately." Chapter 119. Gift Halloween arrived, wrapped in eager anticipation, almost like a prayer. Laughter and bright voices filled the castle, which had been magically and wonderfully decorated for the occasion. The students exchanged gifts and shared sweets with glee, and Hope Cottage was no exception. "Oh, Xian, it's rare to see you carrying so much," Justin teased as he pushed open the door. Xian stood there, surrounded by levitating sweets. Calmly, he set them into a wooden cabinet near the fireplace. 3 of its 6 compartments were already full. With the new additions from everyone else, more than half the cabinet was packed with an assortment of strange treats. Justin used a levitation charm to lift a few more candies out. "Want to try this?" he offered, holding up a blue gummy shaped like a mouse. A moment later, everyone heard Neville's teeth chattering. "It's in my mouth!" he cried, panicked, sticking out his tongue and trying to scrape away the mouse. "Neville, I told you. It's harmless," Hermione said, eyebrow raised but smiling. Justin popped a red sweet into his mouth. "They say pepper imps can make a wizard breathe fire. Get out of the way!" Black smoke puffed from Justin's lips, and flames spurted from his ears and nose. Hermione's smile widened at the spectacle. Her own compartment in the wooden cabinet was full of candies, gifts from her friends at Hope Cottage, and for once that was enough for her. On the table, the shrieking snapdragon drew back as if provoked by the fire. Its vines curled, and it flipped over the letter Xian had left there. Beside the letter sat a silver kitten figurine that seemed ordinary at first glance, but was the product of a very complex transfiguration. Multi-layered transfiguration. The technique involved applying transfiguration repeatedly to the same object, so a counterspell couldn't undo it in one go. Instead of solving a single unknown, you had to uncover several, which is why it's so much more difficult. Xian, however, had more than one gift to prepare that day, so his movements were quick and efficient. A soft cooing came from outside. A pure white owl landed at Xian's window, ruffling its feathers and holding an unfamiliar bird's tail feather in its beak. It looked proud, no wonder. It had bested 10 other owls to reach this window. "Una, thank you for coming," Xian murmured. He tucked several letters and a small package beneath the owl's claws and set out a small plate of meat chunks, toast, and salad for the hard-working messenger. Xian remembered every owl's name. The white owl nuzzled Xian's finger, then flew off with the letters clutched in its beak. At a colorful window on the other side of the castle, Professor McGonagall unfolded the letters. Her gaze rested on the silver kitten figurine. Her eyes, like deep lake water, softened only slightly. At her desk, countless letters were already stacked, each postmarked from Croydon, and many weren't replies, but originals returned by the owls. Today, none of the letters were addressed to Minerva McGonagall, but to a woman named Roland, a volunteer who had often helped at Holly's Charms class. Professor Flitwick, still in high spirits, stood atop a tall pile of books and called out in his squeaky voice, "All right, don't forget the subtle wrist movement we've been practicing. Swish and flick, swish and flick. Pronunciation is important too." It had been about half a month since their last practice, and many of the students were still struggling with the levitation charm. Flitwick looked pleasantly surprised. Last lesson, Harry and Seamus had swished and flicked until their arms ached, yet the feathers had stubbornly remained on the floor. Seamus had even poked a feather with his wand and set it alight in frustration. Today, however, a noticeable number of students had clearly trained together. Pronunciations were neat and consistent, gestures precise and steady. The feathers at least reacted, and some students managed to keep them afloat for a while. "Huge progress, gentlemen, ladies," Flitwick proclaimed, clapping his tiny hands. "I never thought a spell could be so simple. Just follow the notes." "But you still said it wrong," Hermione interjected crisply from nearby. "It's Wingardium Leviosa. The gar needs to be said long and clear." "You think you're better than Xian?" Ron blurted, his face turning red. "Have you heard? You only have the old version, another voice piped in. Xian's levitation charm has improved more than some people have improved since, or from being trolls, someone joked, muffled and unkind. Hermione rolled up her sleeve, flicked her wand, and said perfectly, Wingardium Leviosa. Oh, well done, Flitwick cried, clapping again. Look, everyone, Miss Granger's levitation charm is exquisite. As class broke up, Professor Flitwick asked Xian to stay behind. He held a sky-blue notebook and regarded Xian with genuine interest. Ah, an intuitive method. Very interesting. For beginners, this could be quite significant. But Mr. Green, the mysteries of spells go far deeper than these surface tricks. He praised Xian a few times and then offered earnest advice. Xian understood what the professor meant and nodded. Following the sweet scent of pumpkins in the corridor, Xian watched Hermione stride away proudly while Ron trailed behind with a hopeful look, more interested in new notes than in arguing with Hermione. Xian guessed Ron wouldn't be in the mood to badmouth her now. Hermione wouldn't have to fear any imagined troll incidents in the girls' bathroom. Down the corridor, Ron sidled up to a cluster of Gryffindor girls and asked quietly, Have the green notes been updated? One of Hermione's roommates sniffed, annoyed. Who would know? She says she won't show them unless we actually practice. Humph, bookworm. It's a shame for Mr. Green, another girl said with a smirk. Maybe she's given him some love potion or something. Chapter 120, Crisis. She didn't even tell you guys. No wonder, Ron muttered to the girls as they pushed through the crowded corridor. A blonde Gryffindor snapped back irritably. Someone brushed past them and hurried on. It was Hermione. Harry caught a glimpse of her face, and for the first time that term he saw her crying. I think she heard what you said, Harry whispered. They all fell quiet. Even Ron, who'd been trying not to look bothered, seemed stunned. Well, one of the girls said, though her voice had lost its edge. Maybe she does deserve it. She doesn't even have any friends. Halloween was usually such fun, but this year's decorations felt different. Xian entered the Great Hall and took in the scene. Thousands of paper bats clung to the walls and ceiling, and above the tables, darker swarms drifted like a low cloud. Pumpkins glowed, and their candle flames flickered as if a breeze ran through them. Golden plates were already laden with the same lavish desserts as at the start of term feast. Xian sat at the Ravenclaw table, tucked away from the hubbub, waiting for Hermione, Justin, and Neville. He noticed Professor Quirrell hurrying out of the hall, his turban wobbling, a man who constantly forgot small things and then dashed off in panic. Professor Snape watched him leave from the high table with a cold stare. Neville was already seated. Xian knew Justin was still in the kitchens, but Hermione was nowhere to be seen. He scanned every table. She wasn't in the hall. A procession of ghosts drifted up from under the floor, moaning about the morning's feast. Maggots, rotten fish, burnt cakes, moldy cheese. In the wizarding world, when people become ghosts, they lose many of the living's pleasures, like eating, but extremely rotten food sometimes carried flavors only ghosts could appreciate. That was why ghosts often gathered beneath the Great Hall. Among them, two faces Xian did not expect materialized, Ron and Harry. Xian, we came to find you, Ron started, then faltered. Hermione's really upset. When Ron asked a few girls for notes, they said awful things. Harry cut in, blunt and honest. We're sorry. We looked for her. We found out she and Parvati Patil are close, but Parvati's been avoiding us and won't say where Hermione went. Xian listened, calm. This isn't your fault, Harry. Ron. Thank you for telling me. I'll go find her. Relief showed on both their faces. They inhaled as if a weight had lifted, because with Xian on the job, they assumed everything would be all right. But Xian knew things were rarely that simple. Fate or not, Hermione hadn't come to the feast. What worried him even more was the thought that she might not be in the usual girls' lavatory at all. Finding Parvati became his only thought. At the Gryffindor table, he moved fast and found her, surprised and nervous. Excuse me, he began. Parvati clapped a hand to her mouth, drawing looks from the nearby students. Of course I know why you came, Mr. Green. Hermione is in tears in the girls' lavatory. She won't let anyone comfort her, she said, emphasizing the phrase, anyone. Which bathroom? Which floor? Xian asked steadily. The 4th floor, Parvati replied. She spoke quickly, as if relieved to be of use. Neville moved as if to come with him, but Xian stopped him with one quiet sentence. If both of you go, Who will tell Justin? He'll be looking for everyone. Neville looked bewildered but stayed behind. Chien left the great hall on his own. Then Professor Quirrell burst back in, his turban askew, his face a picture of panic. He stumbled to Dumbledore's chair, leaned on the high table, and gasped at the same time. "Troll, in the dungeons. Thought you ought to know." Then he collapsed, unconscious. The great hall erupted into chaos. Voices rose, people stood on benches, and somewhere a tray clattered to the floor. Dumbledore raised his wand and conjured a shower of purple sparks that burst and fizzed until gradually the noise died down. "Prefects," he said in a low voice that carried, "lead your house to the dormitories immediately." Panic tightened the students' faces. Justin had just come up from the kitchens and, after Dumbledore's instruction, turned white. "A troll, Merlin. Trolls are supposed to be 12 feet tall and weigh a ton. Neville, Hermione, where's Yen?" Neville's face crumpled. "Hermione's on the 4th floor. Chien went to find her." His voice dropped and trembled, but his feet didn't move toward the exit. "I'm not leaving," he said, surprising himself with how steady the words sounded. There was fear in his eyes, but also fierce resolve. Justin's own face hardened. They both left the table as though pulled by the same force. Percy Weasley, on the edge of the Gryffindor table, stood up and began shouting orders. "Follow me. Don't get separated. First years, stick to me. If you listen, you won't be hurt by a troll. Move. Prefect coming through." Ron bit his lip so hard it white-knuckled. "Are they crazy?" he muttered. He tried to force a laugh out of fear. "Chien and Hermione, do they even know there's a troll?" Harry looked at Ron, and in his eyes was a sudden, quiet decision. "Then let's go," he said. Ron chewed his lower lip for a long moment, then met Harry's look. His voice came out half defensive, half proud. "What, Harry? Do you think I'm a coward?